And we've been in the book of Romans. Everybody say Romans. Now, I'm one of those preachers who makes you talk back, so don't talk about me on social media. Please don't. But if you talk back, I promise I'll get you out of here in about 25 minutes or so. If you don't, we'll be here for 3 hours. Amen, amen. Romans chapter 12 is our text. I'm just going to read verse 21, and then we're going to get into God's word together. Verse 21 tells us, Paul writing to the church at Rome, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Can we do something different? Can we read that all together? Are you ready? Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. God, your kingdom come, your will be done at Forest City Church as it is in heaven. We want nothing more, nothing less, and nothing else. God, your people need a word from you. They need a word that will challenge and change them. The only person that can do it is you. I have no power in and of my words. So I ask that your spirit will come down and put your words in my mouth. God, there can't be a fire in this place if there's an iceberg behind the pulpit. So would you light me on fire that I may burn for you, your truth, your love, and your justice. And may the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my redeemer, the one in whom I trust. It's in Jesus' mighty, supernatural name we pray. All God's people said? On May 14th, 2019, my life changed because I had a conversation that would mark me forever. Didn't expect to have it. I was actually going to screen a film. So watching this film in the nation's capital at a prominent museum, Christian museum, I thought I was just going in to watch a movie, but God had an encounter waiting on me. It's funny how sometimes God will meet you in unexpected places. I remember walking in and we were getting ready to screen a film called Emmanuel. And I had a conversation with someone before who really marked me, and I didn't realize until many years later that what she had described to me would mark me for the rest of my life. Her name is Nadine Collier. Most of you do not know who Nadine Collier is, and maybe if I describe the situation that made her famous to other people, it might jog your memory. On June 17, 2015, 9 years ago, a gunman walked into the historic Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina, and he was received by the people there. Their Wednesday night Bible study was happening, and they allowed him to sit at their table. They prayed with him, they talked with him, they interacted with him, and then when they closed their eyes to do the final prayer, he pulled out guns and shot 9 people dead. It captured the entire country's attention. It was known as the Emmanuel 9 incident. And after they had captured the young man who was deeply disturbed and moved by evil intentions, after they had captured him, the judge did something a little bit different at his arraignment. He allowed for the family of the victims to speak directly to the perpetrator. Many people have asked the question, why did the judge allow this? Some people have said that the families actually desired to talk to him. But Nadine Collier, whose mother was gunned down by this evil act of terror, she stood across from him. She was the first person to speak. And she says, you will never understand how much you have hurt me, how much you have taken away from me. I don't know if I can ever recover from this. And then she says these words, but I forgive you. Through tears in her eyes and weeping on her face, she said, but I forgive you. Now, sitting across from Nadine Collier in 2019, 4 years after this fateful incident, I only had one question on my mind. Why did you do that? Now, if I'm honest with you, as much as I like to think I've consumed enough Bible and listened to enough sermons and prayed enough prayers to have a changed life and a changed spirit, the truth of the matter is, honestly, I don't know if I would have had the strength to do what Nadine Collier did. I thought she was some sort of super Christian. I thought that she was an elite, God's special forces, because I'm going to be honest with you, it's not going to be me that does that. So I stood across from her and I asked her this question, and what I got was a lot different than what I expected. She actually said, no, I struggled with this, and I still struggle with this today. She says, I don't know why I said it. I wasn't planning on saying it. It wasn't some grand scheme. I didn't expect for people to see and hear it. As a matter of fact, I was angry. She said, but in the moment, it felt like the right thing to do. And then she looks up to the right and looks back at me and she says, honestly, it was the most radical thing I've ever done in my life. It was the most radical thing I've ever done in my life. That conversation moved me, but it didn't mark me until a few years later. It didn't mark me until last year when I was reminded of it through a situation that I was encountering myself. Now, I know many of you don't know who I am. You don't know me, but can I just get a little permission to be honest and real here today on Sunday morning? Is that okay? Is this a safe space? I was in a relationship, a friendship with a pastor, a fellow pastor. And he and I were building relationship together to work on a project. And I had paused a lot of the things I desired for God, I thought God had desired for me to do, and I desired to do myself because I trusted this pastor's word. And you know, church people can be trusted, right? Right? That's what I thought. And this pastor had slowly but surely undermined and betrayed my trust. Now, me, being naive, I thought there was definitely a way when I sat across from him, he was going to understand the error of his ways, repent, say, what can I do to make you whole? Because every good apology doesn't just apologize and say, I'm sorry. It also says, what can I do to make you whole again? And I sat across from him and I had all my plans together. I practiced the speech in the shower. You know how you do, right? And because I'm a pastor, I had 3 points and a close. I had alliterated points. I felt like I had a PowerPoint presentation to show him. I said, look at all the ways in which our relationship has changed and been undermined. Can't you see this? And instead of receiving it, he rejected it. Instead of opening up his heart and hearing the pain of my heart, he betrayed me. He spoke down to me. The relationship that I thought I could have trusted in as fellow clergy, fellow pastors, people who are serving and worshiping and ministering under the name of the same God and the same Jesus that we all praised and worshiped just a few minutes ago. I thought he was going to be able to connect with my pain, and he didn't. And if I can be honest again, I gotta ask you again, do I have permission to really be honest with Forest City Church? You know, if I can be honest, the first thing I thought when I walked out of that office and I got in my car, there was only one thing on my mind: revenge. You know how sometimes, and maybe some of you can relate to this, when you get in that space where somebody really gets on your nerves real good, you start to change. You start to change your personality, right? And here's the question I was asking myself. I was saying, what's the most radical thing I can do? How can I get his attention? I wasn't trying to hurt the brother. I wasn't trying to drag the brother. I just wanted to make him feel a little uncomfortable, right? I just said, maybe I can insert him into a sermon. Maybe I can talk about him in a social media video. Maybe I can talk about betrayers and haters and people and ops in my IG, and then maybe they'll understand who I'm talking about. I thought there was a way I could navigate around it, and I started obsessing about this idea of what's the most radical thing I can do, because all I felt in that moment was pain. All I felt in that moment was betrayal and abandonment. All I felt in that moment was all the lost time that I had spent serving there. And I was thinking about it, and then I said, well, I don't think that's right. So I put it to the side, but I didn't deal with the heart behind it. It's one thing to use Christian cliches and say, no, that doesn't bother me. But the truth of the matter is, if you don't deal with the pain in your heart, it will seep out in other ways. And I remember a few months after that, I was preaching at our church, and I was preaching, and I mentioned something offhand. I mentioned a comment offhand, and what was within me started bleeding out of me. I didn't mention his name. I didn't mention the church in question. But enough people could detect and figure out what was going on that they asked me if I was okay. Now, remember, after I made that statement and I went home, I felt the Spirit of God say, almost as clearly as I'm talking to you today, how dare you? How dare you use my pulpit as an opportunity of revenge? I had to come back to my church, and many of them didn't really even know the situation. I didn't go into any detail. I just said, hey, I spoke out of turn, and as a leader, I'm supposed to be better than that. I spoke out of turn, and I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? I promise to do better. They were like, what's going on? You don't understand how much pain I was in. And it's fascinating because in that moment, I remembered what Nadine Collier said 5 years ago. I remember that she said it was the most radical thing she could have ever done. To forgive her enemy was the most radical response to the pain and the heartache of betrayal. And then I wrote down this phrase that has marked me. Whenever I feel like someone is betraying me, hurting me, whenever I feel like I've been treated unfairly, and what my heart wants to do is the most radical option. What my heart wants to do is to get back. And I wrote down this phrase that has marked me today. I share it with you today. Revenge is not radical enough. In the moment where you feel like there's something radical that you can do, the gospel actually gives you a more radical option that is also the best option to represent the kingdom of God. It is fascinating because enemy love is one of Jesus's hardest teachings. You know how sometimes you read the Bible, you skip over certain verses? You don't tell anybody this, but you skip over certain verses? Is it just me? You read certain verses because you know if you read it, you're accountable to what you read? So you skip over the verses where Matthew 5, love your enemies. Okay, yeah. Let's get back to the Jesus stuff. Let's get back to him healing and providing. And Jesus gives us a hard command, love your enemy, but it's also one of his clearest commands. He says, you must love your enemies. And if I'm honest with you, I don't like that. But beyond not liking it, it's not just simply because I have a personal problem with it. It's because our culture has morphed our entire society around paying people back for the evil they inflict upon us. Doesn't culture encourage us to keep an account of everyone who wronged you? Doesn't culture encourage us to make a list of all your enemies? Doesn't culture encourage us to end the situation by vanquishing our enemies? We have this narrative that one day we're going to stand in front of them and we're going to tell them about themselves and they're not going to have anything to say back to us. And if we're not careful, culture's mindset when it comes to our pain and our betrayal can seep into our kingdom church relationships. And God might be challenging you today to decide that revenge is not radical enough. There is a better way. There is a more radical way. You've been going through the book of Romans, right? Romans chapter 12. It's fascinating to me. Romans 1 through 11. I love Romans 1 through 11. Lots of deep theology, lots of talk about justification, lots of big theological words and concepts. And then you get to Romans chapter 12, and then what happens? You find out you have to apply the things that you read. Paul makes it abundantly clear, Romans chapter 12, verse 1, you have to present your bodies as living sacrifices unto God, holy and acceptable, and he has the nerve to say, it's our reasonable service. This is your bare minimum. Present your body as a living sacrifice unto God. And then he breaks it down. Now, I'm a little frustrated by this at some point, but the truth of the matter is, Paul gives us clear instructions on how to navigate every practical relationship that we will have, and also how to do it together. You know, he ends this by saying, here's what I want you to do for the people who betray you. Here's what I want you to do when it comes to this idea of revenge and retaliation. Have you ever wanted to retaliate against somebody? Oh, y'all not gonna be honest today? It's cool, all right. Blink twice, it's fine, it's just me and you. If they're on your row, it's cool, I'm not gonna say anything. You ever felt like I could just get them back once, and you think in some cases, God might be behind you. God might be for it. You know, when someone has mentioned what revenge is, it's fascinating. Someone has written that revenge is like rolling a stone, which when a man has forced it up a hill, it will return upon him with greater violence and break those bones whose sinews gave it motion. Think about this image. You're rolling a huge boulder up a hill, but it's coming back down upon you. Someone else has said revenge and bitterness is like drinking poison and hoping someone else dies. This is going to get them. No, actually, it's going to get you. One of my favorite leaders of the civil rights movement is a man by the name of Medgar Evers. And he was actually assassinated while he was pushing for justice and rights in the American South. And his wife, Myrlie Evers, his widow, she said recently, you cannot hold anger, revenge, and hurt within without being wounded yourself. Said it's impossible. So I know we try to cling on to this idea of revenge. I know we try to cling on to this idea of paying people back. I know we try to cling on to this idea of an eye for an eye. If you do something to me, I do something back to you. If you talk about me, I talk about your whole family. Because some of us, we still got some sanctification to do. You know what I'm saying? Some of us, we're still working through that. I understand. Here's the truth. It's actually hurting you. And I'm here to tell you, just like Paul is warning the church at Rome, the church in America must be warned that within each other, within our own churches, and even without in the community, revenge and the desire to retaliate will destroy us. Paul says it in verse 17. He starts by saying, do not repay. Everybody say repay. Y'all got to say it a little bit louder than that. Anyone evil for evil. Don't repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the sight of everyone. Paul is saying here, if someone gives you evil, refuse to pay them back in evil. Now, do you know how hard that is? Now, do you know how difficult it is not to respond and react with evil intent when someone has wronged you? Do you realize how hard it is when you've got enemies not to treat them like enemies? Do you know how hard it is when people have talked about you and they don't know you know they talked about you? You know how hard it is to smile in the face of someone who stabbed you in the back? Do you know how hard it is? And everyone in human relationships is running headlong into betrayal and pain and frustration and hurt. There is no promise in the scripture that says we will be able to avoid it. But there's a couple of things that have helped me out. Can I tell you one of them? You know what's helped me out? Can I tell you? If not, I'll close out and pray and we can just keep moving. Y'all go to brunch. You know what's fascinating? I thought that because people were my enemy, that means they're God's enemy. But then I found out some of the people I have a problem with, God has decided to bless. You know how upset that made me? I'm being real. I'm like, God, I'm doing your work. I'm preaching your word. I'm serving your church. I got a family. What's going on here? The least you can do is fight against my enemies on my behalf. The least you can do, I started reading the Psalms and then those imprecatory Psalms where David's like, get my enemies. I started really reading those really loud. And then I felt like the Spirit of God had to remind me, hey, some of the people who are your enemies are my children. Some of the people that you're trying to get, they're your siblings. They're your brother. They're your sister. So when you think about being an enemy, and when you think about positioning them against you, they may be part of your own family. That bothered me. That messed with me. But then I said, God, why does it say in this text, do not repay evil for evil? Why is it using this transactional language? It's fascinating because when you think about what the biblical principle is, everything that you sow, you will reap. Everything that you plant will eventually bear fruit. There is no action and there is no spiritual thing that you do in your walk with God that will not yield a result in the future. So please understand this. You can't live any kind of way today and expect God to bless you later. You can't walk in one way and then expect to reap the benefits of walking in the way God intends. Much in the same way, when you start paying evil back for evil, here's what happens. The payments never stop. If you are paying evil back for evil, that's unlimited installments. You will be paying evil back and that bill will come due more often than you desire. And some of us think that we can let a little evil into our hearts and then we can expel the rest. No, it literally changes who you are. So he's saying, don't even engage and entertain with the idea of evil because you have been called to be pure and peaceable. Don't even engage with the idea of revenge because you have been called to walk in the way of forgiveness. And then this is the part I can't stand. Y'all ready for the part I really can't stand? As if this wasn't hard enough. I can't believe they gave me this text to preach. I'm so frustrated. You know what's interesting about this? He says, do not repay anyone evil for evil. That means no exceptions. But what about no exceptions? But what about my neighbor that's mean to me? No exceptions. But what about the people that vote differently from me? No exceptions. But what about them? No exceptions. He says, every person you encounter, you have to have already decided and made a decision that you will not retaliate no matter what they do. I'm like, God, this doesn't make any sense. Are you telling me I cannot repay evil for evil with anyone? No one. And I wonder how many of us have made the decision that there are certain classes of people, certain groups of people, certain friends, certain former friends, certain family that God will give us a pass on. I know you can't be meaning them. They're the real sinners. I know I sin a little bit, but they're the real sinners. I mean, come on, God. You see what they've done. You see how they talk about me. And God says, people talked about me the same way. Repay no one evil for evil. Do you realize how this would transform a Christian community if everyone followed this? Do you realize how this would transform a neighborhood and a city if everyone subscribed to this idea? If everyone said, no matter what, I am not going to resort and pay back evil for evil? Paul goes on to say this. He says, verse 18, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at, what's that word? Say it louder. Live at peace with everyone. Now, here's some good news for some of you because you're like, look, it's not happening. I tried. He says, as far as it depends on you. Now, how many of you know being in right relationship with someone is a two-way street? Some people don't desire to be in right relationship with you. Have you ever been in that situation? You've tried to be right with people and they have decided, I don't want to be right with you. Paul says, no worries, no problem. Just don't allow the fracture in your relationship. Don't allow the fracture in your friendship. Don't allow the fracture in the moments where you expect or desire to walk in the way of God. Don't allow that fracture to be because of you. You always choose the route of peace. Let me ask you this. What would look differently in your life if you chose peace in every relationship? Every relationship in your home, every relationship on your job, every relationship in your school, every relationship, every person that you come in contact with. What would be different if you said, at the end of the day, my number one desire is not to be right, it's not to prove myself, it's not to exert dominance, but actually it's to push and lean and walk and strive to have a peaceful and peaceable life. Paul is challenging us here. He's saying, you got to live at peace. Try your best to live at peace with everyone. And you know what? That would have been good enough for me. I would have been like, okay, we got the point. Let's keep it moving. But he has more verses. Can you believe this? Verse 19, he says, do not take revenge. Just in case you thought I was being metaphorical, let me make it literal. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge. I will repay, says the Lord. You know, this is fascinating. God sometimes takes too long, don't you think? You know, I've been waiting for about 4 years for this revenge to hit in. What you mean you're going to avenge? What you mean you're going to repay? Hurry it up, God. You are the same God. You are the same God. Get him. Hurry it up now, God. What's going on here? Been about 4 years. Been holding on to it. We want a quick movement when it comes to revenge, right? I don't know why I started running like that. Y'all were probably like, what's he about to do? Is he about to flip? or something. Come on, God. Go ahead and avenge me. Come on, God, go ahead and get them. Repay them back for all that they paid to me. And you know the thing I thought about that's fascinating? When we are rushing for God to avenge us, we are unintentionally saying, God, rush to avenge others that I've wronged. That if you want it to be quick for others, it's going to be quick for us. And I don't know about you. I don't want God to get me for all the things that I've done. Isn't it funny how much mercy we receive, but how little mercy we can give? Isn't it fascinating how we want God to hurry it up, but we want God to keep it off if it's us? And God says, no, no, no. In the day of judgment, which is a reference to Deuteronomy, in the day of judgment, I will repay according to what everyone has done or should not have done. I'll take care of it. One of my favorite phrases has been over the past 2 years, this is God's business. What are you going to do about what they said? It's God's business. How are you going to respond to what they wrote about you? It's God's business. How are you going to deal with the people who said, it's God's business? Because I recognize that God can see more than what I can. I'm here to encourage somebody in here. Sometimes you don't want God to move quickly with revenge. You don't want God to move quickly with righteous vengeance because God can see more than you can. So we're trying to be God's arbiter of vengeance, but then Paul says, here's what I want you to do. Verse 20. Do y'all see how many verses this is? This is crazy. This is wild. He says, on the contrary, don't be my vengeance, be my supply. If your enemy is hungry, this must be a bad translation. Hold up. Y'all got the same thing in your Bible? What is it telling me to do? If my enemy is hungry, I do what? Y'all don't like that either. Y'all like, feed him. If he's thirsty, what am I supposed to do? Give him some water. What? Do you realize how shocking this is? I know we like to read the Bible. We like to skim the Bible. Don't skim the Bible. Read the Bible. Put yourself in their shoes. Are you telling me that Roman centurions who capture our fellow Christians, burn them in front of the emperor, if they get thirsty, I'm supposed to give them something to drink? Whoa, 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 whoa. Are you telling me that Christians who have violated the commands, who are in the community of faith with me, but they talk about me and they betray me and they do me wrong, I'm supposed to feed them? They didn't get their own food. And here's what I said. I said, God, you know what? I know the word. You're not going to get me. Philippians tells me, you're going to supply all their needs anyway, right? According to your riches and glory. That's what the Bible says. It's your job. And God says, yeah, I'm going to supply them through you. You know what makes me really upset? I can't believe they gave me this passage. Are y'all reading this? Somebody sent them an email, tell them don't give them these passages anymore. It doesn't say if your enemy is thirsty and comes to ask you for water, give him something to drink. It doesn't say if your enemy is hungry and comes asking for something out of your refrigerator, give him something to eat. It says if they're hungry and you know about it, feed them. If they're thirsty and you know about it, give them something to drink. If they have any need and you know about it, supply their need. Anticipate and bless. Now, here's the thing about this text. Here's the thing about this passage. It's getting all of us in our point of discomfort. Some of us want to retaliate. Others of us have no problem with that. We're like, I'm not here for the smoke. It's cool. So he says, don't retaliate. Then he says, leave space for me to do my work. Then he says, now go and do good to your enemies. And when was the last enemy that got a Christmas card? Who was the last enemy in your life that got a gift card to their favorite restaurant? Who was the last enemy in your life who got blessed anonymously from your bank account? Who was the last enemy in your life that you decided to pray a prayer of blessing upon? If we're honest, this is the place where we get into real mature Christianity. This is the Christianity I may not be ready for yet, right? This is the Christianity that says, wait a second, so I have to do good to my enemies and those who persecute me? What sense does this make? And then he says, you're going to heap burning coals on his head. Now, I like this. This sounds good, okay? Fire on his head. I like this. But he's actually referencing potentially 3 different interpretations of what this could mean. Number 1, he's saying you'll put shame and conviction on them, and they'll see how good you were and how they shouldn't have messed with you. Right? I like that one. That one sounds pretty good. Then, number 2, he says, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to put burning coals into a pot that's on their head, because Paul might be referencing an Egyptian concept that says when someone has wronged you, you actually put burning coals in their pot so that they can go and warm their house. Okay, I like that one a little less, but I get it. Still fire on his head, right? Here's the 3rd one, and this is the one I think is most closely accurate to what Paul is trying to say. When you heap burning coals on their head, you're giving the opportunity for God to turn an enemy into a friend. What if the people who you dislike the most were the people God might be calling you to befriend? Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Right. Well, let me say this. This is very important, right? What this is talking about is us trying to strive not to retaliate. Now notice, we're not talking about justice. We're talking about revenge and retaliation, okay? So God says it's not our job to take revenge and retaliation. We have a justice system. We have criminal justice. We have all these things. We have systems of justice. And our God is a God of justice, amen? 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 The Bible tells us in Psalm 89 that righteousness and justice are the foundation of God's throne. That means right living and also right ethics and action. So here's what God is saying. God is saying, you worry about what you can control, and I will worry about ultimate justice. And this is good news for us because some of us, we cannot get to all the people who have wronged us or the people who have wronged something else. But God says, I didn't give you that job. I simply gave you the responsibility to respond in my character to everyone you come in contact with. Amen. And aren't you glad that God is the one who will ultimately give everyone what they are supposed to receive? God is the one who will ultimately execute justice for everybody. So this means, this is good news. And hear this, nobody gets away with anything they've done. I know it may seem like they got away with it, but in God's grand scheme of things, eternally, nobody gets away. Now, I know this is something that might make us comforted when it comes to other people, but it might make us uncomfortable when it comes to ourselves. Amen. So this is why we pray for everyone, including our enemies. May mercy be upon them. You know what's fascinating? Jesus, when he was dealing with soldiers who were nailing him to a cross, you know the first thing that Jesus says? Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Father, don't charge it to their account. Jesus was dying for the sins of the people who were nailing him to the cross. Amen. This is challenging. And I get it. It's frustrating. It's overwhelming. It may make us feel a certain way, but I'm encouraging you, there is a reason why Jesus calls us to live this way. Let me illustrate it like this. Last week, in the previous sermon, Jackie, she talked about this. She talked about 2 different things, right? She said what is often MIA is LIA, right? What is often missing in action is love in action. So what she's talking about is loosing love. Now, here's what I want to show you. 2 pictures. On one hand, you have love in action. All right? Everybody say love in action. Now, here's the thing. If love in action is loosed in the church, in the body of Christ, and if every Christian decides to do it, it's a stream that nourishes a garden. Picture this, a soft, calm stream that nourishes a garden and causes everything within it to grow. That's a good picture, right? Now, here's what happens when we release revenge. Revenge is the opposite of love in action. It's actually evil in action. So if love in action is a stream, evil in action is a brush fire. And rather than nourishing everything that it touches, it burns everything that it touches. So here's what God is saying. God is saying, I want you to live according to love in action, because everything that is revengeful and evil, it actually looses a fire that you cannot control. Here's the thing. Some of us think that we can just get the person who has wronged us. But how many of you know, if you try to get the person that's wronged you, oftentimes you'll get other people too who didn't wrong you. Let me give you an example. Peter, when Jesus is arrested. Does Peter get a centurion? Does he cut off the ear of a centurion? Actually, he cuts off the ear of a servant who had nothing to do with it at all. And this is why God says, always loose love in action. Everybody say love in action. Love in action. Now here's the final thing that he wants to tell us. Here's the final way he wants to encourage us. I know y'all like, please let me go. Get me out of this sermon. Verse 21 says this. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. There's good news in this, church. God desires his people, his children, and his church to overcome evil. God desires us to fight evil. God desires us to overcome evil. God desires us to win against evil. Aren't you glad about that? God desires for evil not to have the final say. Aren't you glad about that? But here's the one stipulation. He says you can't play by evil's playbook. Can't do it using evil's methods. You can't win using evil's weapons. How many of you know we don't fight against a war of flesh and blood? Paul says we fight against spiritual wickedness in high places, principalities, powers. And he says you have to fight a different way. I'm not lying to you. I really got upset when they gave me this passage. And you know why I got upset when they gave me this passage? Y'all want to know why? Because it forced me to do something I do every single year. Since 2015, God has moved me to sit down with a sheet of paper and write out a list of the people who I think are my enemies. It's not a hit list, I promise. But just in case y'all got really good cameras, I just used their initials, okay? Not gonna put them out there. But I told First Service this, and I'll be honest with y'all. There's a lot of pain on this list. 6 names. It's a lot of pain on this list. It's hard for me to hold it. Some of you are just getting to know me, so you don't know my story and what I've been through. I don't know your story, what you've been through. This pain right here, it's legit. Some people on this list are people who I trusted. Some people on this list are people who I've never done anything wrong to. Some people on this list, I didn't even know they knew who I was. But they hurt me. I got to write this list up. And I don't burn it. But I have to confess how I feel. I have to identify what I'm feeling in my heart. And I have to sit down with the feelings wheel and I have to say, God, I feel betrayed. God, I feel abandoned. God, I feel frustrated. God, I feel angry. God, I feel abused and misused. God, I feel wronged. And I have to hold this list and I have to identify it, and then I have to get in the presence of God and confess how I feel to him. Because one thing that I'm glad in all of this is that I serve a God who can handle all that I feel. And I serve a God who can handle even the messy feelings. I'm so glad the Bible has a book entitled Lamentations for our laments to God, our complaints and our pains to God. But I go to him, I go to God, and I tell my wife and I tell my therapist, and I stop it there. I don't go to people. I don't go to social media because I know if I start it, I'll never stop. And then God makes me go the extra step. And God says, for the people who you can, I want you to attempt reconciliation with them. But God, I'm not even the person who did the wrong. And God says, hey, remember, I wasn't the person who did the wrong when I came down and reconciled with you. Jesus says, I did nothing wrong, and I died for your sin, not mine. Your wrong, not mine. Attempt it. They may reject you. Attempt it. You may not be in a place to with all these people. I already know with this list, there's a couple of people I can't do that with yet. I've just got to pray. And then the final thing he tells me to do, and they'll put it on the screen. He asked me to find a way to bless them. Send them something anonymously. I'm going to take all these people, and I'm bound to it now because it's on the tape, and I'll talk with you. So y'all going to come back and be like, oh, how much money did you spend? I'm bound to write them a check. I'm bound to put some money in an envelope and leave it in their mailbox. Why? What's the purpose? I want to be like Jesus. And every day that I spend fixated on what they did to me is another day I'm a slave to the pain I experienced. And Jesus did not die for me to be a slave to my pain. Jesus did not die for me to be bound to my hurt. Jesus did not die for me to be clinging to the idea of revenge. Jesus died so that I could be free. And church, I'm here to tell you something. I want to challenge you. Do one of these things this week. I know some of you high achievers, perfectionists. You can be like, I'm going to do them all by next Sunday. Probably not. It's okay. It's between you and God. It's not about performing and showing people how well you live this Christian life. But I just want you to maybe do one. Maybe it's praying and asking God for the courage to find out a list of your enemies. Maybe it's writing down your feelings. Maybe it's making a phone call you know you need to make, but you've avoided. But just do one thing. And maybe if we take that radical step, the gospel will be rooted deeper in our hearts, and Jesus will be glorified, and we'll be free.